Colleagues and friends, welcome back to the Bold by Choice podcast. We are super excited to have a deep conversation with our friend and colleague, Mark Weinberg. You guys know him, you've heard of him, you've been in trainings with him, and if you don't know him, you will get to know him today. Mark, thank you so much for being back with us on the show.
I'm happy to be here, Vashaunta.
Well, we said earlier, folks, think of this as you're just kind of having coffee with us and we're talking shop. I want to get kind of right into a topic that actually has come up recently. So, Mark, I think that most boards function decently, right? But I think we would love to see boards go from good to great. And I think we often see boards can do very well until something difficult happens. Some change comes about that shakes things up. That can be the enrollment drops significantly, and we need to rethink our plan. That could look like the school leader resigning and moving on to their own next adventure. Finances can tighten. I think a lot of us are seeing that happen in real time right now and are readjusting ourselves. Politics can intensify in some moments. Public trust can get tested, et cetera, et cetera. And so what happens is suddenly the activity on the board feels a bit different. Suddenly governance feels like it takes on a new form. Why do crises reveal so much about a board?
Well, I think when it reveals the negative, it's because, and I know this sounds dull, but board policy is important. Written policy that the board, for me, I often compare it to a security blanket. Generally, they don't use it until they absolutely need it. And it's good to have it there. Then you come across boards that haven't either got sufficient written policy to direct in times of crisis, or they aren't aware of their policies, that their policies are outdated. So frankly, I think really effective boards, when it comes to a crisis situation, can take the right direction and be as calm as they need to be during a time of crisis by relying on solid written policy that they've both developed in good times and ensure that they're in place. An example you gave is the school leader turnover. I've seen both circumstances. A leader literally drops the keys on the desk and says, "I'm out," and there's complete panic and no plan. I've seen other situations, and one I was relatively close to, a board I've been working with for a long time. The longtime school leader announced his departure for personal reasons, family reasons, and the board was a little bit worried. And then the leader pulled out their policy that they'd worked on, their succession plan, and frankly, they followed it over the next 2 months. They did have 2 months to plan, which is not ideal. You'd have longer than that to plan for a new school leader. But having that very clear policy and plan to follow essentially made the transition as smooth as you could hope for.
And that's a good point. I love that you brought that out, is having the time, taking the time to make sure that you, one, have your policies, two, that everyone on the board knows what they are, knows where to find them, how to locate them, so that in these moments where it gets a little bit tougher to serve, you have those policies to pull back on and to kind of guide you right through times of crisis. Because I think times of crisis shift who we are in our brain space too. We can have panic reactions. We could begin to kind of emotionally make decisions, right? Versus pulling back to the policy. What's the procedure? Let's go about this logically. Sometimes in crises, in my experience, where we had a little bit of a not real crisis, but like something happened, you can start to get information overload. Like everyone's trying to tell you these different parts of the story, and you're really trying to synthesize and be a deep listener and also make sense of all of this coming in. And so there can be a lot of ways in which crisis could show up for a board and how it could negatively impact their ability to make those decisions. So I love that you started with, in those times, getting back to the policies, back to the bylaws if necessary.
We often here in Michigan, we love our lighthouses. So we think of that as the lighthouse that they've built in advance of the storm, and that it's there and it's ready for them to use. And it's shining light on all the things they need to, but they need to revisit it and ensure it's in good shape and sound.
Let's go to like a real story moment here. Can you share a moment or a story where you observed a board navigate a difficult decision or maybe even a difficult season?
A really large decision that some boards navigate is the movement from working with a network or a charter management organization to self-managing. And
Oh, that's a
the
good
one
one.
that comes to mind, it worked well because again they had a very strong leader, and that
Mhm.
strong leader really guided them through the process, and they were able to retain that leader as well through the process. And frankly, it actually, in this particular situation, it came back to policies. With the leader used their policy deck to help the board understand where its role shifted from one where, frankly, the charter management organization had played an extremely dominant role and the board had been very much in the background, to where they understood they needed to step up. They now had a direct report, and even the language in the policies had to be tweaked to ensure their role was clear in this new organization. And they took time over that. They did it over weekends, they did it over breakfasts, and that was actually a bonding experience for the board as well. But they did it
Yeah.
calmly under the leadership
Mhm.
of a strong leader.
Yeah, can we color that in a little bit? What was the setup to the decision to make that shift without naming names or, giving too many details? Like what was happening prior to that led to now the board had to make a decision and then the board had to navigate the particulars of that decision.
As it so often is, it was academic performance. This school was just getting by. It wasn't, making the headlines in any good ways or bad ways. It was just getting by. Their enrollment was okay. Their financial situation was okay. So it was just easy to coast along. However, their performance was on a steady decline,
Mhm.
and their
Mhm.
management company wasn't delivering, even though they, and again, they didn't the board hadn't taken a leadership role. The management organization had really assumed that leadership role, and so they had tough discussions, and they made that tough decision, saying, "Listen, this has gone on too long," because this was many, many years in the making. And they finally made that decision. And their key part of that decision was to retain the leader. Even though the leader had been an employee of the management organization, they said, "You've got to go. We're keeping this leader and we're moving ahead on our own." And again, it was tough, but it resulted in,
Mhm.
stronger results. Now, I will tell you, the leader eventually left the school, and I just heard last year that this board has gone back to hiring a management organization.
I was just about to ask, what do you think the board ultimately learned? And I'm still going to ask it, but that's interesting, the turn of events.
Well, it goes back to something, Jim will tell you. One of the board's primary roles is to ensure that, that they have recruited and retained the most competent leader possible. Jim often refers to a level 5 leader from Jim Collins' work. So again, that worked well, that they had that leader, they retained that leader, they moved towards success. But once that leader was gone, they actually didn't have the things in place to a proper succession plan. And they ended up sliding back, and they're, they resorted to going back to a management organization. Which, again, there are lots of schools that are very successful with really good management organizations. It's not about managed versus, self-managed. It really is about the leadership and the relationship between the leadership and the board.
Hmm. There's some risks that could have showed up in this story, right? So we think about we've got a leadership transition in the name of the CMO, but the school leader stays in place. But then the second transition was that that school leader then had a transition out. And so there could have been some risks that showed up in those three spaces. Um, let's pull forward some of what those risks could look like. How did the board look at their vulnerability in each of those transitions? And what were some of the risks that they had to start to manage?
A lot of what the management organization had been doing previously had to be taken over by individuals in the school. So that was a major risk. Do we have the right capacity to ensure the back office operations are going to be effectively undertaken by the team we have at the school? And what do we need to ensure that that is in place? And again, I don't want to put too much on the school leader, but in this case, it really was long, in-depth conversation and forward planning with the school leader, and the confidence in that school leader in this situation that allowed it to be a relatively smooth transition, mitigating most of the risks.
Yeah, I love that you pulled a couple of things out. It sounds like in this story, the board's big lever, we talk about things that boards can lever. Their big lever was around leadership. And some of the risks probably could have showed up as, okay, what are the additional supports that the other adults in the school building may need? And that might have led to a second lever, which is the budget. They may have needed to make some decisions or some adjustments with the budget in order to ensure that the other adults in the building had the resources they needed, the training they needed to be able to take on those additional roles. And so I love pulling that out and sharing with boards. Like, things happen, right? It's not about pretending they won't, because they will. It's how we lead when they do that's really important. So remembering our levers, leadership, all of the support they need, the budget, making sure that's aligned with the priorities, which would be number 3. And so it seems like in this case, the priority remained, how do we keep all of the adults in the building doing the things they need to do so that we don't lose track of this academic performance, but then we actually start to improve it?
And you mentioned that term risk, and I think not enough boards do educate themselves on their role in risk management. And a colleague of ours, Dr. Brian Carpenter, puts those into 3 buckets: people, property, and programs. Because often when people think about risk, they think about just their insurance policy, and they think about their financial controls, which are incredibly important. You need to ensure the financial controls are in place and you have adequate insurance. And there are all those other risks to your people, to your property, and to your program.
Mm-hmm.
Start by ensuring that everyone understands that what the role of the school is, what the role of the board is, and protecting their people, their programs, and their property.
And you brought this up earlier, and I want to go back to it for a minute. You're like, well, not everything's on the school leader, but in this instance, it kind of was. And I think sometimes we underestimate the how emotionally exhausting it can be at times, for leaders, especially during times of transition or times of difficult decision making. What do you think separates boards that kind of become a stabilizing factor from boards that may be more uncertain or may not have those policies in place to be that stabilizing factor?
I think, again, it goes back to the distinction between the roles, and the stabilizing board is one that has really embraced its role of owning the vision and the mission of the school, of having that strategic plan in place, and focusing on the stability of the school and the future success of the school without ever getting into the operations of the school. I'll tell you, I've too many examples of this, but I recall sitting through 45-minute discussion at a board meeting of where basketball hoops should be placed, that they'd be newly approved in the budget. Absolutely not a board topic. Ensuring that the budget is meeting the needs of the school, as you said, and is aligned with the mission of the school. But beyond that, a board that gets into deep discussions of, leases for vehicles, or placement of basketball nets, or colors of uniform items. That's just absolutely, staying away from those operational items is absolutely critical, because the last thing a board, or so rather a school leader, needs are 5 or 7 or 9 opinions on these operational matters.
You guys, I love reframing stuff. And part of the framing that I want to reframe and maybe eliminate if we can is this idea that it's governance or it's leadership. And I want you to think about that. Governance is a form of leadership. Board members lead, school leaders lead, principals lead, teachers lead. The real question is not whether the board should lead. The real question is it leading in its role as the board? And how does it do that? And so governance and leadership are connected. The role of the board and the role of the school leader are different spots to lead from. What works magic is when they're aligned. And what are they aligned around? The shared vision, the shared values, the clear expectations. That's how you win for kids.
Absolutely. And pulling out, let's go even deeper. When we think about the behaviors or the habits, we often say, from strong boards that understand their roles and can lead through the happy times and the not so happy times really well. What are some of those behaviors that you see consistently show up?
Great question, Vishanta. It's absolutely that clear preparation. When you're seeing a board reading materials during a meeting, and they're clearly have seen it for the first time, that's just such a key indicator that that board member wasn't well prepared. Ideally, and I think I shared this story with you. I used to attend a board meeting for one on a regular basis for one school that started at 7:30 in the morning. Now, I've never been able to convince another board to do that, but this was a group of board members who were local community members, and frankly, they were all business owners, and that was a convenient time for them to meet. And they also generally agreed they had to be out of there in half an hour. Now, most board meetings don't end in 30 minutes. These board members were so well prepared that they could use a consent agenda. And we won't get into the details of meeting preparation, but they had a consent agenda for the stuff they really didn't need to discuss. They'd read it. If they had questions, they'd ask questions in advance, and they were ready to approve those items. They really saved that precious 30 minutes they had to ask deeper questions and to think strategically. And they were almost, in all cases, out of there in 30 minutes.
Yeah, I love that you shared that story with me. And I was like, wow, I cannot even imagine in and out in 30. But you pulled some pieces out that I want to reiterate for these positive habits, right? Long term strategic thinking, being very well prepared. I'm going to name them bold or courageous conversations. So you highlighted that, like being ready to like thoughtfully have discussions. And I'm going to add one. I have my board and I have added this to our own practice, and we call it the student-centered decision making. And so we ask ourselves every time we need to vote, every time we need to take action, what is the impact on the students? And if it's a subset of students, which subset and what might be some risks in that decision? And I know that sounds basic, like, duh, it's a school. Of course, every decision is student centered. But I think we all know that sometimes in practice, it can start to slip away from the focus on students. And so we have literally made that a part of our behavior and our practice is to ask ourselves that question when we're making decisions.
Vashaunta, I love that because what I hear is your board established a value, and that is we're going to focus on kids when we make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to think through the impact, the consequences that are intended and what we call the unintended ones. It's a beautiful way to think about it. So I'm going to try and say something pithy and profound. The board's job is not to run the school. We all hear that. We all say that. Here's the kicker. It's to make sure the school is worth running.
Ooh,
Worth
like
running.
that.
To make sure the school is worth running.
Mm-hmm. You're in your bag on that one, Jim. I like that one.
Now, if any board members out there saying, I'm not sure our school's worth running, you better call us because we hold advances and we help you get running. We don't do retreats because we're not going backwards. But these kids, these schools, these families need to be excellent. And that's our commitment as board members. We're given our time to be the stewards of excellence for all kids. That's what we're really called to do. All the other stuff, yep, it's part of the calling, but our job is to make sure these schools are worthy of the kids they serve.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I did an advance with the board just a few weeks ago, and it was surprising to me that how little they understood about how poor their academic results were. And frankly, I think they've been in that mode for the results have been so poor that frankly, Jim, as you were saying, is this school worth running when there's, 5% proficiency or so, extremely low results like that? And they did have to ask themselves those questions. And the good news is they were reinvigorated by the end of the advance and are going to demand more updates because frankly, the results were so bad, people didn't want to look at them. And
well, I'm a huge advocate for boards to focus on one question that has three parts. Are we preparing our students for success in college, work, and life?
Mm-hmm.
And what's our evidence we're preparing them for college? What's our evidence we're preparing them for work? What's our evidence we're preparing them from life? And if you stay focused on that and you can answer affirmatively, we are preparing our kids because that's more than test scores. That's making them the human beings that we want to be in this world, good neighbors, good citizens, good friends, good bosses, good employees. Like it's the whole kid. And that's what we want. We want these students to shine and find their gifts and go after it.
That was it. That's the boardroom moment right there. That's the question. I love that you posed that. Well, for our next segment, we have our lovely Bold by Choice conversation deck. And I'm having a good time with these today. I've pulled a new card. The category is Bold Team. Here's the question. If students help design our culture, what would matter most to them?
Vashaunta, I love that one. So, Mark, if you don't mind, I'll take a first crack. Vashaunta, you just had breakfast with Ted Coldery in Minnesota, and you were talking about teacher powered schools, and you got to visit a couple. Ted talks all the time about our real issue is right there, student engagement. Some call it agency, some call it motivation. But the idea that a student can take ownership and responsibility for their own education is a beautiful thing. And so he says, how do you design schools to maximize student engagement? That's a big question.
That's a big question.
But it also goes to, do we trust students or are we trying to control them? Because students want to be challenged, they want to be encouraged, they want to be seen and heard, but they also want to do something meaningful. And when you think about it as adults, when do you learn something? Not because somebody makes you, but because you want to learn something. You're trying to figure out how to do something. That's different than going through a textbook that says we got to be on this page or that page, right? We just saw the West Michigan Aviation Academy. I want to fly. I want to do aerospace. I got a reason to learn math and science, and like those kids are on fire. Their test scores show it, but it's not because they're pursuing a test score, it's because they're pursuing their dreams.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. You're taking me back to our summit, and we had students from the Jalen Rose Leadership Academy do the lunch panel, and they were very clearly passionate about how their voices show up in the culture of their school. And I remember one of the students sharing that because she's SGA president, there is a role on the board for the SGA president. And so her voice, and I want boards to hear this, is that there are students involved, engaged, have a seat on the board. And I think if I were to ask another student, I believe they would say that what's important for them in the design of the future of education is for them to be a part of the decision making.
You know, Jim often uses the distinction between you've got to go to school and you get to go to school. And kids who get to go to school enjoy it. And so joy, that word joy is in addition to the engagement, and that comes from the top down. The board enjoys their role as a board and governing the school strategically. The leadership loves the school and supporting the teachers, and the teachers bring joy into the classroom. So all those pieces together, I've visited schools that are very rigid in terms of how they deliver their curriculum, yet the teachers do it so effectively and love what they're doing, and they bring so much joy into the classroom. Even though you see it, you may from the outside see it as a traditional classroom with rows of desks and textbooks, the joy is what matters, and everybody enjoys being there together, and that comes from the top.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Mark, thank you so much once again for the gift of your wisdom and sharing here on the show today. We very, very much appreciate it. And to our listeners, if you haven't already joined us, like don't wait another day. Go ahead and click that subscribe button. Make sure that you're tuned in with us every single week. This season, we are exploring multiple tensions and decisions that often boards face. And so we hope that you'll stay with us. Until next time, we hope that you'll stay bold. We'll see you next week.